Right here.
Yeah, I want to see where we at. Where's it?
Look at this.
What's the topic? What's the topic? Oh, there it is. There. All right. I'm getting old. You know. Now Peter's piped in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
John's taking care of all.
Peter's really piped. All right. Turn the machine on. All right. This next session, session 11, it's a tribute to Michael Novak. And
That's mine.
and you got that part?
Yeah.
And you're going to Peter first? Okay. All right, Peter DeMarco. Oh. Peter DeMarco, he's not here today, and that's too bad because Peter is really an interesting guy to get to know, and
He's probably going to come out on these speakers, though.
and he always adds to the dynamics of this place from the business world, where he tries to blend his Thomism and especially some of the moral development work of Dr. Redpath. But we're glad that we have him online, and Peter's worth listening to. This is a guy that's in the trenches. He's a business coach, and teaches at part of the year at a business school, and comes out of the background of the military. But he's what I would call a ragamuffin. You know, he's out there, and he really works very hard at taking what some of us have been talking about doing here, taking these Thomistic principles and weaving them into what we do in the marketplace, whether it's IT or working in the government. So I think you really enjoy Peter, and he's got a very tight methodology worked out over the years on how he has done that. That's important. He's worked his synthesis out over the year. Marvin is a good friend of ours. He comes here every year. Marvin works for the federal government. And what department are you in now? You're in the
Labor.
Labor. I thought there was a rumor that you were on the Trump cabinet. Is that what? Was it all on the short list? So Marvin's an economist, and he also has been very occupied since I've known him in working together the metaphysics and the philosophy of Thomas and through Dr. Redpath, and blending it with the discipline of economics. So he's going to be very interesting to have. With that, we will begin with the first speaker. I'm done.
Okay, so we're going to give this a try here. Pete's on the line, connecting him in, but I got to use my. So let's see, how's this going to work? Actually, this isn't going to work that well because I'm on the line. Hey Pete, I'm on this line, so we're ready to go. But I can't have my phone on at the same time, so I'm going to hit mute. Then I'm going to turn on you for the speaker, okay? And then just if you need something, yeah, right. And so when it's time, I'll relay, okay? But just so that you know, I'm going on mute so that it doesn't create this feedback. The conference line. If you want to, you can. Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, where are you going to speak? Are you connected audio or no? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So just by fact of you calling in, you can go through your voice from the phone is coming through. But so doing, yeah, so whichever's easier on your end is going to make the same. Okay, all right, yeah, just why don't you talk into the phone here, and then we'll play it by ear, see how it happens. Okay, so I'm going to have to step back here. Peter? I'm sorry. What's that? I tell you what, you know what? I'm going to plug you into my phone right now. Okay, Peter, are you there?
I am.
Okay, all right. So everybody can hear you.
Greetings, everyone.
You guys hear me?
Okay.
Okay, all right, Pete, you're on.
An introduction I couldn't hear.
Yes. Yeah. Bill gave an introduction already. Yes.
Okay, greetings, Bill.
Hello, Peter.
Yeah.
All righty. And Dr. Redpath, hello. Chuck can't be there. Circumstances didn't permit it this weekend.
Well, we're sorry you can't be with us, Pete, especially for this session dedicated to Michael Novak, our friend and former colleague.
So, yeah, so he's sorry as well. So we're ready to roll.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to count on John to relay this, because if you can hear my voice clearly, it's difficult for me to hear anybody responding. So my presentation today is on the executive coach as an educator, and subtitle Reforming Contemporary Business Leadership One Soul at a Time. All of the content today that I'm going to take you through and we'll debate and discuss is really from Dr. Redpath's. He's been mentoring and coaching me for the last 13 years, and frankly, I owe some credit to Bill McVeigh as well, since he's helped translate at times when I needed someone to go talk to. So, and then my colleague, friend, and partner John Lyle has been with me for the last 13 years. So, you know, he'll help relay whatever I'm inadequate at doing through the phone. So let's get started. John, if you could go to the next page. First of all, I want to communicate a sense of hope to everybody today that we are taking the concepts that Dr. Redpath developed, and of course they come from Aristotle and Aquinas and Adler and others, and trying to apply them in the business world and other organizational venues like the government, nonprofits, educational institutions, etc. So I want to give you hope, but I also want to express that I need your help as well. We would welcome your feedback and insights, corrections, etc. So as we go through today, if you see any errors or anything where we made a mistake, please feel free to jump in. Dr. Redpath has ensured that I understand the nature of error, since I'm probably one of his best students at committing errors. So we want to correct them early and get them fixed if you see anything. Next, I want to comment on leadership. I've been a leadership coach now for 13 years, or actually going on 14 years. Prior to that, as Bill might have explained, I ran companies in Mexico and the U.S. And what I've discovered is that there is just a very poor understanding of the nature of leadership. A post-enlightenment mindset has just filled it with an alphabet soup of concepts and constructs, but no clear understanding of what it is. The soul, or the nature of the soul, is not even treated as essential to understanding leadership. And I'll just tell you a quick story. I was at Deloitte Consulting. They had me come in about a half dozen times to do sessions on leadership with their emerging leaders. And as you'll see in a moment, the leadership model I teach from, called the Goodwill Leader Model, I asked the students a very simple understanding or a question around the human person. I said, what is the unifying principle of a human person? It was 30 minutes into the discussion before one of the students, or I'm sorry, one of the emerging leaders at Deloitte finally said the soul. And boy, did that activate a huge discussion among these young people from the age of 25 to 35. It was fascinating, but they grasped that the soul was this unifying principle. Now, I didn't get into a rigorous definition around the soul, but it was interesting how they all kind of anchored it. So they're not even getting exposed to this stuff, but once they get exposed to this language, they're actually quite attracted to it. And then today I'm also going to talk to you about coaching. In fact, we're going to introduce our four-part educational model for coaching and ask for your insights. All right, John, if you could go to the next page, is our navigation pane. And I'd like to give you all a brief overview. And John, please interrupt me if there's a question or if there's a quick comment. So quickly, just going to tell you a little bit about priority thinking. John will click there and it should take you. We've been in business since 2003. I actually discovered the concept for priority thinking in 1993 and met Dr. Redpath thanks to John Lyle in 2007, where he recognized that what I was doing actually was just trying to practically apply Aristotle and Aquinas and other realist concepts to the business world. Okay, John, go to the next page real quick. We did three things in our business. You're welcome to go to the website if you have your computers. It's called prioritythinking.com. We do leadership coaching, organizational development, and ethics education. The whole model is completely integrated. It's not a quilt. It all anchors off of this nature of the good, nature of leadership, and it just kind of expands out. I'm going to give you some examples today. But our initial mission, and it remains true today, is to help leaders, employees, and teams to recognize, learn, practice, and keep sound priorities. And we'll give you a little bit of exposure to that today. Now, our core value prop, which resonates with our clients in the business world because they're very results-oriented, is to increase performance, reduce risk, and embed ethical power into decision-making at every level of the organization or firm. And so just to give you a quick example, on the next page, John will show you we have just a spattering of our clients. Many of these you may recognize: AIG, MetLife, Deloitte, Bank of America, as well as some top universities. Dr. Redpath and Dr. Hancock have been with me when I teach at Duke. Also, we go to MIT. We've taught at the other top MBA programs, as well as the military academies. The Army, Coast Guard, and Marine Corps are very interested in our leadership model, which I'll expose to you, and the healthcare segment. So it's just a quick spattering to let you know we are really engaged in helping organizations out there to succeed. Okay, go ahead, John, next page. Many of you in the room may recognize Raphael's School of Athens, represented here as the School of Priority Thinking. This is if you go on my website, you'll see how we reconstructed this painting. It's a 4-foot by 8-foot painting I had commissioned in 2008. It was actually finished this year. We kind of just carefully had figures placed in there. The lower right-hand corner, you'll see President Obama with President Trump actually just slightly up to the right, and several other figures surrounding him. That's me kneeling down playing Alexis de Tocqueville, the first consultant to America, and so I'm taking notes there. The center of the painting, you may notice 4 figures. The African-American male is got his finger pointed into the air, similar to Plato's position in Raphael's original painting. The Hispanic woman has got her hand out flat, like Aristotle, basically telling Plato to get real. And then I added 2 figures, the skeptic to the left and the materialist to the right. You may notice further to the right of those 4 figures are 4 figures in the shadow there. There's Darwin and Freud arguing. Mortimer Adler is right there in the center, trying to convince them they're all screwed up. And then there's Dr. Redpath looking over the shoulder of Freud. So John is actually way over on the left side. He's playing Machiavelli. And there's some other figures in there. I won't go into them all, but I wanted you to know the reason I'm showing you this is, if you go to the next page, John, the materials we're developing and launching all come from 4 books. The first book comes out is, just click on the slide, John, there you go. It's called The Goodwill Leader. The Goodwill Leader is really the anchoring book, and I'm going to expose you to that model. It was actually inspired by President Obama's election. He was the inspiration, but as I tell folks, not the destination. And I'll go into that in a minute. The second book is called Priority Thinking. That's actually an extension of the Goodwill Leader model. very practical, applied realism. And the third book, which Dr. Redpath is waiting on me to get done with, The Goodwill Leader, is called Power Psychology, and I'm trying to convince Dr. Redpath to join me in this. But as you all know, Dr. Redpath is he coined the term power psychology, and we are actually applying his concepts in the market today in a very very active way. And then the final book, it's called Later You Will Understand. That's my wife Debbie there reading to some children, including some of my grandchildren. And it's takes a quote from the Lord, I believe out of the Gospel of John, and it's about leadership in the age of now. So those 4 books, all integrated, all pulled together, the concepts, and as you can see, they're snippets from the painting I had commissioned 10 years ago. So John, let me pause for a minute. Any questions, John, from the group on just the overview of the model so far, before we get into the actual guts of the model?
No, I think we're good to keep
Go.
chipping away. Yep.
Okay. All right. So if I were to ask you all a simple question about what is leadership, we would probably get as many definitions as there are people in the room today. And I found that to be true when I was out there trying to understand this profession I was in. I've been a leader for almost all of my life. I was educated at our nation's leadership factory, the military academy at West Point, and yet I never came across a consistent definition of leadership being applied wherever I went. So it became clear to me that if I was going to be in this game called leadership, I needed to make sure I had come up with a definition that worked. And so thanks to Dr. Redpath, I was actually able to achieve that. I'm going to show you that, and John, there's something in the way on the screen, not sure what it is. Whatever you've got your mouse on is in the way. But John, if you go to the next page, I'm just going to introduce the model real quick, and then we'll go from there, okay? So the first book, The Goodwill Leader, the reason I'm going to show you this model is because as an executive coach, I found that if I didn't understand the nature of leadership, it was very difficult to coach people on leadership. And the more I got into coaching, the more I realized that the role of the coach as an educator was really why I was being hired by companies, where in fact many companies were bringing in coaches because, many coaches were actually therapists or psychologists who found out they could make more money in the profession of coaching than doing therapy. So to be blunt about it, I would tell you that 70% of the executive coaches out there today don't really know what they're doing, and probably as many therapists that I've come across are causing equal harm, if not more. So I realize that's maybe a jaded or harsh comment, but it's a battlefield out there, and there's a lot of casualties. So just briefly, I wanted you to know, in our model, the Goodwill Leader, we realized that leadership could be identified and expressed across the full spectrum of leadership we observe in reality today. So, for example, the ISIS general, or the general in Iran, or any tyrant we see around the world, including the North Korean leader. All those leaders are actually leaders. Modern literature likes to treat them as something different, but the reality is they are leaders. And so in our model, we identify them as powerfully effective, bad leaders, and in our definition of the bad is actually related to Dr. Redpath's definition of the good, which is anything that completes the whole. So the bad is nothing more than a defective good on a gradient or scale of good. And so when I use that term, I want to be clear that this isn't a Manichaeist model or anything like that. All right, so you'll see on here that we've got this spectrum or gradients of good, from good to bad. And then we have the faculty power, or the choice faculty of the will, going from weak to strong. So when I'm coaching leaders, believe it or not, the vast majority of my clients are on the left-hand side of that diagram. They're weak-willed to some extent. And even the good leaders who are trying to become really good or super good, maybe that's another term for great, are up in that right-hand corner, but they're still generating bad will or at moments of weak will that are affecting their effectiveness and ethics as leaders. So this model integrates the notion of effectiveness and ethics together, and that's how we coach leaders toward that upper right-hand corner. Okay, so John, any questions before I go to the leadership model itself?
No questions.
Okay. All right, so on the next slide, you're going to see from John, this is the Goodwill Leader Model. Now, I'm just going to show you briefly our definition of leadership, and you're going to recognize some of the discussions you've had in the conference around heartful relationships, etc. But I just want to tell you that most coaches out there do not have a leadership definition and model they're coaching to. And I spent years working on this, and with tremendous help from Dr. Redpath, was able to finally come up with this definition. So here it is, briefly. Leadership is a communications relationship. And what makes this relationship different than a relationship you might have with your friends, which is most people consider healthy friendships to be relationships of equality. What makes leadership a uniquely different type of relationship is that it's demonstrating the quality of inequality to others such that they're willing to take direction. Now, if you're a bad will leader, you're expressing that quality of inequality through often bad means or good intentions with bad ends. So, for example, if any of you are familiar with communism or socialism or familiar with the ideology of it, it was common for Westerners, and I know when I was a young soldier, they would always talk about how the communists manipulate and put fear into people. But anyone who's really familiar with communism and socialism knows that they were actually quite good at understanding how to communicate and educate people in their ideology. And so they were very effective at getting people with good intentions to join a bad system. So bad will leaders we often reduce them to a label of just being a tyrant and manipulating people. But the really effective bad will leaders are very effective communicators. They know how to take people's good intentions or desire for the good and create a compelling or seductive apparent good and get them to go towards something that ends up being very bad. Goodwill leaders, of course, are using influence, persuasion, and a variety of other means to communicate a compelling inequality. And these inequalities vary depending on the leader and the organizational context in which they're leading. So, for example, if a general is going to lead, he or she has got to have the qualities of courage and judgment and all sorts of other things, but also the knowledge of the weapon systems, tactics and strategy, et cetera, et cetera. Take a general, put them in a business environment, and they're not going to be able to demonstrate the quality of inequality to lead a business. They're going to have to learn a lot. And I've seen a lot of my classmates now are just getting out of, at least the ones who made it all the way to general, are finally retiring. And, there's a hard transition for them going into the business world because they've got a lot to learn, a new language, new ways of doing things, etc. So I'm sure that's common sense to all of you, but the key point here is that once the leader establishes a communication relationship and demonstrates that quality of inequality, then three primary functions have to be activated for that leader to be a full leader. They have to set an aim that is consistent with the nature of the organizational whole that they are leading. And so, in other words, if you're running a bank and you set an aim to become a pharmaceutical company, your followers are naturally, through common sense, going to say, this leader's a lunatic, I'm out of here. In other words, the aim has always got to be consistent with the nature of the thing itself and should be identifying untapped potential or unactivated potential within the matrix. And so then the second function of the leader is to activate that potential, and in the process of doing that, strengthens or unifies the group. Now, to unify a group, as you know, you have to order it, and to order it, you have to, to unify a group, you have to organize it, and to organize it, you have to bring order to it, and to bring order to it, you have to set priorities, and they have to be sound priorities. And so that's how the whole notion of priority thinking works within this model is we actually work backward in understanding how disorganized or disrupted or how many disturbances trap goodness within the organization and within the leader. And we go about reestablishing those communication relationships and taking bumpy dirt roads and turning them into superhighways within these organizations. So, and as you can see just through that simple analogy, we use the power of analogy frequently in educating and coaching leaders. And then the rest of the model, I'll just let John click on the center there. You click there and you'll see that, it just explains each part of the model. One part I did not explain is that organizations have resistance and receptivity dynamics going on all the time. And so we will use resistance both in a positive and negative way to show leaders how they need resistance in order to strengthen the organization as well as to overcome barriers to unifying. So I won't go into all the model. I just want you to know we have a robust model. It breaks down, it's unpacked and explained in the first book, The Goodwill Leader, and then the second book, Priority Thinking, that you saw, actually takes all of those unifying principles you need to strengthen the group and explains a variety of sets of priorities that need to be understood and activated. And you don't need to have a PhD to access these priorities. They're accessible through common sense. And so, as you all know, Aristotle was the philosopher of common sense, and we use the interactive polling technology John has already demonstrated to you and a Socratic method to show that. All right, one other thing here, real quick. John, if you go to the currency of leadership, in the book we show that leadership is a currency of leadership, and goodwill is the currency of leadership, and we show the model, and then the chapters of the book are on the reverse side of this coin we constructed. And just so you all know, you'll see this online once we launch the book. If you go to the next page, John, we have gold, silver, and bronze coins. Of course, it's going to be an 1.5 ounce coin. So recipients of the Goodwill Leader Award will actually be getting about a $1,500 coin. Silver is running about $16 to $17 an ounce, so that'll be probably worth $25 to $50 a coin. And then the bronze coins will, just be given out in more mass for people to use this as a sign relationship, if you will, of what leadership is. So just a quick introduction there. Okay, and then on the next slide, go ahead, John. Yeah, that's fine. Finally, before we get into the coaching model, I do want to introduce you to chapter 2 of the book, which is the 5 interlocking goods. This is going to be important when you understand how we go about educating leaders. We identify 5 dimensions, if you will, of the good that leaders have to understand, and we coach using this model as a framework for educating leaders. So they have to know the good, desire the good, choose the good, practice the good, or build habits of making good choices. And if they do those 4 things repeatedly, they have a good shot at securing the good or generating good results over the long run. So that's called the FIG model. And John, if you go back to the top now, we can get into the coaching framework. So I'm sorry for that quick review, but I hope that gives you an understanding that we have a lot of stuff under the hood that we can take you through. All right, so John, let's go to the next page, and we can come back to the map pane in a little bit. I put those links on the slide, okay? All right, so what is coaching? Well, I'd like to tell you that the same problem we have with leadership, there's over 600 definitions of leadership today. There's as many definitions of other things. So it's a real mess out there, but John and I kind of researched this, and we've got 11 definitions here. I just want to show you from Harvard Business Review. Coaching is an activity through which managers work with subordinates to foster skill development, impart knowledge, you'll see threads of education throughout these models. Adaptive coaching, actually, it's not a bad book for those of you who are interested in coaching. He says it appears in the workplace with the intention of improving the executive's interpersonal skills and ultimately his performance. Other definitions up here, I just want you to all have flavors of educating or aims towards some positive change. So that they have a sense for that organizational wholes are at work, and they have a sense-making quality to them, but none of them are that precise. Go ahead, John, to the next page. And here are just 6 more definitions. All of them just with a variety of, variety of flavors on that. So, all right, so our definition of executive coaching and why it links to this whole notion of education. Executive coaching is the process of educating the leader on the nature of leadership within their organizational context. And to educate requires the coach to assist in the leader in understanding and the nature of part-whole relationships. So this is critical in our model. If a leader cannot grasp the makeup of the whole that they're leading, they cannot lead. So sometimes I'll be coaching a leader who's got his or her PhD. They were, for example, a really top technologist within the firm, and now they're in a leadership position, and they are literally overwhelmed by the part-whole relationships that are going on to make that firm come together. Well, they were so overly specialized in one area, they had their PhD, but they can't grasp, they never were able to develop the habit of thinking of understanding part-whole relationships above their level of specialization. So this is the reason you'll find some smart people in leadership roles that are struggling, is because they're overly focused on a few of the parts but can't grasp how the whole works. All right, so, well, we got the same problem in coaching. We have a lot of coaches that are therapists or psychologists, or frankly, anybody who wants to be a coach can be a coach today. And they go into businesses and they're coaching people who have in roles that are well above anything they've ever done in life. And, it's a mess. And they do a lot more harm than help. Many times they've got something that is good, but it's just not good enough to help educate people on the nature of the part-whole relationship of a firm. So, most of us would agree that Coach K, who, as you may know, is a champion basketball coach from Duke University, you put Coach K into a football team, an NFL football team, and he may have real grasp of human nature, but be clueless about how the game of football works. So if the leader doesn't understand and the coach doesn't understand the nature of the thing, this organizational whole, then it's quite likely they're doing harm. All right, so then I just want to give you an idea of the relationship that's at work. Primarily when I go into coaching, there are 3 key players. The coach, that's me often, or one of my coaches on my team. The coachee, the person being coached, and you could say team as well, because I often go in and coach executive teams. And then the sponsor, which is usually the chairman of the board, or the board of directors, or the CEO, etc. And so this is kind of the basic relationship that has to be built. And frequently when I go in, I have to do an intense discovery to understand what holds this organization, this whole together. That's my job, is to figure out how it works, and so then I can properly coach the leader in that context. All righty, John, I think you're trying to type something to me, but I can't see anything on the screen. So John, is there anything you're trying to relay?
Yeah, about 15 minutes, I think, is about what we've got left.
Okay, very good. All right, so then get into the education model and invite any questions or dialogue. We have identified a 4-part coaching model for educating leaders, and so we're constantly trying to find ways to apply this model in in the way we work with our clients. The 4 parts are the didactic method, or the notion of lecturing. The Socratic method, which is, anyone, if you are trained in the Socratic method, know that it's actually a shaming method where, properly done, the student wants to know something that the coach or educator is directing the student towards a clear understanding of a particular good, or how a particular good fits into a broader set of goods or wholes. And so we use the Socratic method within our model because we're constantly trying to see if the leader understands and can discover, through a set of good questions, sound priorities, or how something works within their firm, etc. We also use collaborative inquiry, which is a common term out there today, but it generally means shared learning, where we're just going out there and learning with them. And then finally, kind of a drills and skills. This comes from some of the stuff you'll recognize from Adler's concepts. And so these are the 4 ways we go about educating and exposing people to it. Now, let's go to that part-whole relationship. And if you get into Dr. Redpath's notion of power psychology, or the faculty psychology that Bill's done a great job of unpacking this as well. Bill McVeigh has. We know that there are parts of the human character, like memory, will, imagination, sense or intuition, etc. If those parts are properly understood and work correctly, well, then we'll get a well-integrated person. So General Krulak, for example, the former commandant of the Marine Corps, gave me about 4 or 5 hours at his house. He's got a wonderful definition of integrity. He calls it wholeness of character. And he actually wrote a great article on how wholeness of character occurs. Well, for any of you familiar with the Euripides play Medea, with the main character Medea, Medea makes this her children for a husband who has betrayed her, to punish the husband. She says, when passion trumps reason, the direst of consequences ensue. We see a disintegrated personality, or an antisocial personality. So why is this important? Well, in our model, we spend a lot of time educating leaders on their external sense faculty powers of sight, hearing, taste, etc., and how their interior sense faculties of imagination, will, intellect, etc., work, and how the emotions then are this kind of combustion point, those 11 primary emotions that Aquinas identifies and Aristotle does. We bring that together to give them this kind of understanding of the powers they possess, how to master those powers, self-mastery, as well as how to extend those powers through the organizational whole they're in charge of leading. So John, if you wouldn't mind going back to the nav pane, click on that lower right-hand thing, and I'll just give you all a quick example. If any of you are familiar with the Cistercians, the Trappists, or the Benedictine monks, that's right, John, when you click there, these monks, they're one of my clients, actually coach their leaders that make monks bread. And so what I'd like to tell you here is I'm going to give you an example of how we educate leaders in this power psychology using their external and interior sense faculty powers. And we take that powerful concept, that very provocative concept of the leader's quality of inequality, and we show how it has to extend out into the organization, or the organization's inequality. In other words, why would anyone ever buy from you? Why would any employee ever join you? That powerful quality of inequality that forms your organization's quality of inequality becomes their value prop, and it's an expression of a powerfully good culture that's attracting people to it. So for the monks, just to give you a quick example, go to the next page, John. Just click, there you go. We'll take their, this is just I know it looks a little bit complicated, but for those of you who've got some business experience or engineers, we broke down their baking process and taught their leaders actually how to work backward from a consumer, take all 5 external sense faculties, and then begin to translate it back into their process and teach them how to order the organization towards its aim of providing the market with really tasty, highly nutritious, naturally made monk's bread. And for those of you familiar with the Benedictine tradition, the monks are supposed to have their own economic communities. They don't beg for alms. They're supposed to literally make their own bread or make money. And so this is how we use it. So then if you go to the next page, John, this is how I help them understand how to work backward from the consumer experience in through their distribution channels back into the business. Okay, now, how does this translate into those faculty powers of developing a leader? Well, under our power psychology model, we've developed this whole framework called educating your emotions. And we use the emotions as the combustion point between those exterior sense faculties and the interior sense faculties to help the leaders regulate, understand, develop, strengthen, and eventually toughen the soul of these leaders so that they are able to express themselves, communicate in a healthy way. So it all ends up back at the soul of the leader, where we're educating them by tuning their soul to higher goods and lower goods and sequencing these goods properly, and then toughening their soul so they can withstand the rigors and the setbacks and difficulties they're going to have along the way. So, John, I know we're short on time. Why don't I stop there? I just want to give that brief over. Go back to
Okay. Does anybody have questions or anything? I know we've got to get to the next.
I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more around the means of education. I mean, I think I understand what he means by Socratic, and perhaps also collaborative inquiry. I didn't quite get the didactic Wilson skills, which, you know, I don't know much about. I've never heard to say about that.
So, Pete, the question is, can you elaborate more on the education model, sort of the four forms of education here, the means of educating from the Adler model?
Yeah, so a lot of coaching, if you go out to the International Coaching Federation and other groups, they claim, a lot of these coaches claim that the Socratic method is the method that all coaches should be following, and you never give answers. You help that person to discover what they already know. In other words, coaches are not supposed to lead the coachee towards a defined end. In fact, this is the modern mess that goes on in most educational systems. So we found, though, that most modern coaching doesn't understand that the coach has got to know that organizational whole they're working with. So I apply one or more, actually I'm always applying all four of these methods in educating my clients. So for example, in the didactic method, when I'm coaching someone in that particular, when I'm doing the lecture, it's usually because the leader just doesn't know what to do. So for example, when I have a sales leader, many sales and marketing executives make it to the top of a company because they're really good at generating good results for the company, and so they just work their way up the food chain. So when I'm coaching a CEO who's a sales and marketing executive, was his trajectory, many times they cannot read a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, or a P&L, a profit and loss statement. And so they're literally ashamed. They're afraid of being discovered as an imposter. So they don't want me asking them 90 questions about what they do or don't understand. They just say, look, spoon feed me right now. Get me up to speed. Help me be conversant enough so I can communicate with my board of directors. In that particular instance, I'm using a didactic method, with some Socratic methods used. Collaborative inquiry, when I got a really smart leader who knows their stuff, but they're struggling with a complex market issue, then I'll say, hey, let's go out there and see what's going on. Let's probe a little bit. Let's find out where things work or don't work. And so in that process, we're out there discovering with them and helping the leader to kind of have literally what I find is when leaders are panicking, they're under stress, they're having a failure of imagination. And what I'm trying to do is get them to get their courage up, get them to see a broad range of possibilities. And so I'll go through that process of activating, helping to activate their imagination so they see possibilities before them. Now, believe it or not, the drills and skills is just getting them to go through the basic routines of sound priorities. So John will tell you we have an operational excellence model that I'll deploy into banks and manufacturers and others where their fulfillment function won't get fundamental priorities straight. And so I'll teach them, okay, here's how you work those priorities and activate them as a drill. So that's, John, is that helpful or did I miss the mark?
We have a great time.
Peter? Go ahead. Peter, it's Bill McVeigh. Yeah, I'm going up to Boulder in a couple of weeks to look at their management emergence program. Hear me okay?
I don't think you can hear you. Yeah, you just, actually, if you want to ask it, I mean, if you can jump.
Yeah, just hand the phone to them, John. I'll do my best.
Okay, but I got you connected through the phone too, so they got to come up here to do it.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Peter, it's Bill McVeigh.
I'm sorry, folks.
It's Bill McVeigh here.
Yeah, Bill.
Look, I'm going up to Boulder next week to their School of Emergence Behavior up there and look at all the techniques they're using to train people. Are you developing any methods or group training processes, be they visual or interactive, to give the students, the employees, a sense of sensing the whole within an organization rather than going to see to the parts and all the small parts first? You know, I'm really talking about kind of group dynamic practices or exercises you can do with people when you're educating them on one and many or parts in the whole, where you just don't talk about it, but you actually have exercises where they can start sensing and learn how to see and feel a whole from the beginning of a problem and then going down to the parts from there. Yeah,
actually, I find you've got to use induction to get things going, and you got to be real careful not to make a mistake in how you apply it. So, Bill, what I'll start with is a particular problem that they're having, and then I use that to help them discover the part-whole relationships. So, for example, case study is a common method that applies this, but that's what I've found has worked with most teams. Is they're in pain. Pain is limiting their sense faculty powers. And so then I help them kind of sort through it through induction, if that makes sense.
Sure.
John, if somebody's talking, I can't hear. I don't know.
Hey, Peter, how you doing? This is Marvin Pilates.
Hey, Marvin, how are you?
Fine, thank you. I have a question. I find this fascinating. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm not a high-level executive. I'm a lowly first-line supervisor, okay? But I manage a team. I supervise a team of 7 employees, all high-performing. And my view of coaching, what I've come to learn here and there, because I was always interested in what exactly is coaching, is, the question I want to ask you, where does this fall within your, I'm going to explain to you what I do, where does this fall within your means of education, of educating? So I see, when I have my employees in my office, they sit across from me at the table, and my goal is to develop them to be excellent professionals at what we do. So I look at myself somewhat as being like a midwife, like Socrates. I know that there's a human soul sitting right in front of me. They have habits and they have these potentialities, but they need to activate those habits to become excellent. So I talk to them about excellence. I talk to them what I think is excellence based on my experience in the government, and I kind of want them to put themselves, not because I direct them to put themselves in an uncomfortable situation where they grow. Where would that fall within your scheme of means of educating?
Well, that's a great question. I have found that, there's a big fear of failure out there for people. So I have this little trinket of a quote that says, fail small, fail early, fail often, so you don't fail big once, or big, late, and once, right? The idea then is that if you can educate people so they can sense these holes and give them ordering principles so that they develop harmony, once people feel like they're in harmony, then their imagination and their intellect are much more receptive to learning. So otherwise what happens is they're constantly feeling resistance or tension, and that limits their ability to connect the dots, if you will. So I tend to focus first on the ordering principles that bring the greatest harmony to the group. So John will show you, if you go to the navigation page, John, real quick, if you don't mind, John, and you'll see we've got this inside-outside model. So John, go over there to the right, which says approaches to leadership development. And this might help you, Marvin. I can get with you offline, but I actually find that it's less threatening sometimes for leaders whose egos, you know, they're very smart, they're sharp looking, but they got more fragile egos, and you got to be sensitive or else they'll just kind of, you know, they'll just go dark on you. And then I'll start from an outside in, where I'm helping them to discuss what's going on around them, get them to see the parts and ask them what constitutes the right order of doing things. So, for example, I'll give you a quick example, Martin. I just did this morning with a young ops manager. I listed alphabetically 4 operational excellence priorities. I'll give them to you all. If you want to do a quick exercise, I'll show you real quick. I said, okay, delivery, which is a time-based priority, and delivery means you deliver the product or service on time or when the customer expected it. The next one is flexibility, which means it's a cost-based priority. You deliver the product or service at the lowest marginal cost possible. The next one is quality, which is an expectations-based priority, which means that you produce the product or service at the expectation level for the price paid. And then finally, alphabetically, safety is a health, well-being, and asset protection priority. And it literally just keeps the whole from being destroyed, right? Or the person from being destroyed. Okay, now, alphabetically, delivery, flexibility, quality, safety. If I asked each of you to write down what do you believe is the order that those priorities should be practiced day in and day out for sustainable value creation, I'm willing to bet that within the room today, we would get different ordering of those priorities that I just listed, right? Again, delivery, flexibility, quality, safety. Now, what I do then with a group is, as I'm educating a group, I'll get them to debate that. You know, debate that ordering principles, you know? What would constitute real harmony over and over again if we practiced all 4 of these priorities? And the reason I do this is because I tell them you have to do all 4 for the organization to make money, okay? Or you have to do all 4 for this hospital to thrive and not kill its patients. Okay, these priorities, by the way, apply to almost every organizational whole. All right, they're unifying principles when they're put in the proper sequence. All right, so Marvin, then what I do is, using the outside-in approach, that gives people a chance to inspect their decision-making or their choice-making, right? Because we know that virtue is a habit of excellence, of right choice-making. Well, then they'll see, oh, wait a minute. I didn't get these priority sequence right. So let me give you the answer now for those of you who did this little exercise. The correct sequencing, and we've done this through our research, is safety, quality, delivery, flexibility. So get that, safety first, then quality, then delivery, then flexibility. Now, what we've discovered through our research is American Airlines has a much steeper curve, right? Safety is at 8 sigma level versus versus a bank, which might have safety down at a lower level, but it's still higher than quality. So the sequence of the curve changes. So Marvin, what I do then is by using external priorities like that and establishing what constitutes ordering principles, then the person can begin to inspect their choices against that. And we give them 4 basic choices. We say there's the inverter. The inverter puts a lower good above a higher good because the priority is a choice among 2 competing goods. The absolutist puts the higher good at the expense of the lower goods, and as a result screws them all up. The depleter, they're anarchic, they're antisocial personalities, or they're clueless. They can't get it right no matter what. In other words, they screw up the priorities. The optimizer puts the priorities in the right sequence, in the right proportion to each other, so that you get the optimal good. So that's how we drive excellence. We often do the outside-in approach. We will do the inside-out approach when we're dealing with a leader who knows what they're dealing with, but they're struggling with some self-mastery issues. But that's an example, Marvin, of how I approach it.
Thank you. Okay, Pete, I think that's it. So Marvin actually is up next here, and so we need to leave some time for him here. So is there anything in closing?
No, I thank you all, and my sincerest apologies for being there or not being there. And Dr. Redpath, as always, your medicine. Bill McVeigh, I hope to catch up with you soon. So greetings to everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there. I definitely be back next year.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I gotta.
All right. Okay.
I just want to make one remark here before Marvin starts too. You notice how throughout that whole activity that Pete was talking about, you have this holistic psychology. The psychology of the human person, the moral psychology, the organizational psychology, relating metaphysical principles to the nature of an organization, and how you're taking those basic courses that are taught to undergraduates, the philosophy of the human person, ethics, metaphysics. Right? And they're basically now extended throughout the whole of the organizational activities throughout the culture. And so instead of the universities doing holistic scholarship a disservice by replacing the holistic studies with this failed sociology and pseudopsychology, is liberated the Thomistic scholarship to a whole new level of being able to change the culture. What we have to do is look at it a little bit different and see how this is this tremendous communications activity for transforming leadership through the virtues of the soul, habits and virtues of the soul, in relationship to a missionary activity to the 1%.
He said when he hit his impasse, he relied on you to help him have a breakthrough. Can you name a particular instrument? What did you help him?
Well, for example, in coming up with the definition of leadership. Yeah, that makes a difference. And this was at West Virginia to a certain extent, and we're talking about a lot of leadership. So I said leadership and communications activity. Right. I knew this from living in Brooklyn, Bensonhurst. Well, I'll communicate with you.
Ready?
So if you can't communicate, and in inequality, where Adler talks about the teachers in person, and you don't argue for your intellectual equals. You argue for your intellectual betters. So if you can't communicate that there is an inequality where you possess some sort of excellence that some other person is interested in acquiring, then and make a qualitative change, you don't have a leadership relationship. Yeah. You don't have a relationship. First of all, it's a relationship. But chiefly, what kind of relationship? What's the key? It's communications. You're communicating inequality. And people in business don't want to hear this today. Because you can't have inequality, because that means inequality of talents.
What do you mean inequality?
What? Those because you have the receptivity and resistance. It may be less, but unless you have that receptivity within, you can't establish that relationship. Well, no.
Okay, we have to,
I think we should maybe.
Marvin started. Okay. All right, we go into the second part of our session. Marvin Place is here. He's an economist. And I'm glad he's here, Marvin, because you may give us your opinion, because we were told this morning that it's going to be absolutely impossible to ever reach a 3% GDP growth, okay? So well, that you might enlighten us if you get a chance on that, so the way the future is growing. So Marvin's an economist. He's been here before. He has spent very devout Roman Catholic, spends time doing a lot in catechesis still. No, catechesis, yeah. Okay, and he's also, you better be careful when you ask him questions, because he's got very advanced belts in the martial arts, so I don't want to mess with him too much. And I see your pages on my Facebook when you send them to me, and I love to watch you getting beat up by your peers. Yeah. So, but Marvin will be talking about economics, as if metaphysics really exist. And just to prep you, I would say, my God, I hope it does. Okay, Marvin.
All right. All right. All right, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I look forward to seeing all of the presentations on, in video. I was unable to be here the first couple of days, but I'm very happy to be here to present this. Earlier this year, another one of our esteemed colleagues passed on to eternity, Professor Michael Novak from the Catholic University of America. Okay. Unlike some of you in this room, I never had the privilege of meeting Professor Novak in person. I know him through his written works, lectures, and debates from YouTube videos, especially those that inform my research on the nature and role of the human person in the economy. Okay, the goal of this paper is to pay tribute to the late Michael Novak, to highlight some of his accomplishments, and to offer the example on the manner in which he expended efforts to renew the West through common sense. Novak was a theologian, philosopher, author, and a former three-time ambassador to the United States for President Ronald Reagan. He was not a metaphysician, but you clearly see his metaphysical thinking in his writings about practical affairs concerning politics and economics. This became clear to me when Novak participated in a three-way debate on capitalism, distributism, and socialism at Nassau Community College Center for Catholic Studies in 2009. Mind you, that was the year right after the financial crisis in 2008. Okay, Novak defended capitalism and did so convincingly, but I think he may have been misunderstood because his underlying premise was the human person's ability to not only be productive, but creative under certain favorable conditions. Okay. Thomas Stork, who defended distributism, and Dr. Charles Clark, who defended democratic socialism, both promoted Catholic social teaching and their respective economic traditions, based their premises on unjust markets, the power of economic institutions, the state's ability to determine who has rights of participation in the market, that markets are unnatural, and the need to curtail excesses of artificial wealth. We can say that Novak was an apologist for capitalism insofar as the human spirit is a principle of this economic system. Specifically, his work intersected economics with religion and philosophy, which at the same time upheld the dignity of the human person according to Catholic social teaching. His work on economics and business was well regarded inside and out of academia and in the business world. His public lectures were well attended by business leaders from industry. What made Novak and his work on economics appealing was that he didn't use technical or scholastic language in his works or talks. He had a gift to communicate powerful Aristotelian Thomistic principles to a general audience. Having written many articles and more than 45 books, he went about this task of renewing common sense from many different perspectives. I venture to say that his vast works are a summa, in our day, much like St. Thomas's Summa Theologiae was for beginner students of theology in his time. His magnum opus, Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, Novak indicated that, like Aristotle and Jacques Maritain, he too would learn about one sphere of human action after another. And this meant learning about fiction, writing for television, and journalism, but above all, studies on the church, politics, ethnicity, the United States presidency, sports, and labor unions. However, Novak saved economics for last because he thought it was the most complex. But who informed Novak? Okay? Although he was widely and deeply read, he read most deeply of all the writers, St. Thomas Aquinas, and his modern interpreters like Gilson and Maritain. His favorite book was Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and St. Thomas's commentary on the same book. Now, what is democratic capitalism? Democratic capitalism is a highly concentrated term. It rejoins the political and economic orders that are fundamental components of society. These components were separated in the late 19th century with the rise of the specialized social sciences. At the turn of the 20th century, emphasis on empirical scientific investigation led to what we know today as the discipline of economics, a so-called value-free hard science. Previous to the science of economics, the field was called political economy because it entertained normative questions. Implementation of economic policies took into account their impact on people. Okay, Adam Smith, a moral philosopher, took into account the impact of economic policies on people in his Wealth of Nations, and in the lesser known but equally important work on moral philosophy, Theory of Moral Sentiments. According to Novak, democratic capitalism is a political economy that comprises three overlapping systems: a market economy, a political system respectful of human rights, and a system of institutions based on a moral culture of liberty and justice for all. The common denominator in all three systems is the human person and his economic activity. Thus, the human person is the focus of political economy. Consistent with Catholic social teaching, Novak pointed to principles on human nature to convey the primacy of the person in the economy. Thus, the economy exists for the person, not the person for the economy. Democratic capitalism provides a framework for organizing human activity to allow the best chances for economic prosperity at all levels of society, especially the poor. Novak cites as evidence the migration patterns to nations with capitalist systems. In addition, Novak said, you don't have to trace poverty for many generations within these nations. For example, he said that his grandparents were poor Slovaks that migrated to the USA and became miners. I am a first-generation born American from a South American family that immigrated here in the 1960s. My parents worked in factories back when the US had a sizable manufacturing industry in the 1960s and 70s. Some may find provocative, provocative the claim that democratic capitalism is good for the poor. Okay? In the debate, Dr. Charles Clark, economist and historian at St. John's University, indicated that the tradition of democratic socialism distrusted the ability of markets to solve significant problems, like the poor, because they lack political and economic power. Quoting John Maynard Keynes, Clark indicated that the government needs to ensure well-being by providing public goods such as education and healthcare. CUNY and SUNY, the City University, state universities, I understand, are now providing free tuition, and we are still in a bit of a quagmire with the healthcare situation in this country. Okay? Clark did not reconcile the human person with the market. To him, markets were unnatural, made up of the power of institutions or people. In addition, democratic socialism was realistic and provided empirical evidence on whether economic ideas worked. This is the reason why his economic tradition focused on market failures to justify why government intervention is needed to correct them. Clark stressed that one needed to embrace reality instead of ideology. With democratic capitalism, all three systems have to work as one. And markets are natural because they are essentially made up of groups of persons engaged in economic activity. If any of these three systems did not operate in unison, you will have different economic systems depending on the emphasis placed on any one system. Some variations may include, as Novak believed, bastardized forms of capitalism. Okay? The hallmark of democratic capitalism is the human person and his dynamic economic activity. Novak uses the word dynamic several times in his writings to emphasize that the human spirit has the potential to be not only productive, but also creative. Novak developed the idea of the creative human spirit from Max Weber's Geist, which he felt was narrow because Weber wrote only about capitalism, not democratic capitalism. Novak differentiated between a static economy, the mere buying and selling, and a dynamic economy where there is progress, development, and innovation. These activities, Novak says, are virtues of business, habits of the soul. This is where he acknowledges that the human person has a faculty psychology. So-called heterodox schools of economics have made admirable efforts to humanize economics, but the faculty psychology of St. Thomas precedes them. According to Dr. Redpath, moral activity is an outgrowth of the faculty psychology of the human person. Okay. So Novak talked about habits, virtues, and business activity and dynamic economic activity. These are philosophical concepts that are based on the anthropology of St. Thomas Aquinas. This becomes clear when Novak states that the Achilles heel of democratic capitalism is that for the last 2 centuries, the 18th and the 19th centuries, has appealed so little to the human spirit. The reason, Novak says, is because of the failure of the intellect. According to Redpath, the intellect, or more precisely, the intellectual soul, is the chief principle of all vital actions of the human person. This implies if you don't have a human person properly understood, then you cannot have a properly working economic system or any other social science. The anthropologies of the 18th and 19th centuries were completely unlike the ones political economy was originally based on. Novak was renewing common sense because of his democratic capitalism was based on Thomistic anthropology. The Spanish scholastics of the 16th century, those doctors from the school of Salamanca, set the precedent when they wrote about economic activity in their time. Although Enlightenment thinkers such as Adam Smith were hostile towards things medieval and the scholastic approach to analysis, he nevertheless inherited some of the seminal ideas from the Spanish doctors through Protestant scholastics. Novak indicates the common teachings of the Spanish late scholastics had already established many of the rudimentary presuppositions we now take to be liberal or capitalist, quote unquote, for both of those terms. These views concern public finance, monetary theory, the theory of value, price theory, wages and profits. Thus, there is a continuity of economic thought from St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century to the Spanish scholastics in the 16th century to Adam Smith in the 18th centuries, and then it was resumed again in the late 19th century when Pope Leo XIII wrote a series of encyclicals to address the rise of modernity and the economic unrest brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Gilson noted that the first 2 encyclicals, Aeterni Patris, right, and which is on Christian philosophy and on human liberty, laid the foundation of the entire structure of social encyclicals that were to follow. In his commentary to these encyclicals, Gilson indicated that after recalling the history of Christian philosophy and defining its nature, the Pope declares that no social reformation is possible except on the basis provided by the doctrine of St. Thomas Aquinas. Now we go on to economics as if metaphysics existed, okay? To discuss economics as if metaphysics existed, we first have to know where the economics profession is today, okay? The economics profession is in a state of flux, okay? Because economists do not agree on the subject or methodology of economics, okay? This is pretty much the same with other social sciences. The argument way for why this is the case is the same that Moore and Moore Adler made for modern psychology. Economics, after all, is dependent on the psychology of people. Since I am an economist, I am happy that my profession is vibrant with different points of view. It allows me an opportunity to reincorporate Thomistic principles in modern economics. I credit those economists who dare go before Adam Smith and mention St. Thomas's contributions, and those of the Spanish doctors from the School of Salamanca in the 16th century. Now, where is the place of democratic capitalism within modern economics today? Ever since economics was separated from political economy in the late 19th and early 20th century, the nature of the human person was lost. Okay? In his place, you have economic man and Homo economicus, a caricature of the human person who is essentially a self-interested, greedy individual, not a person. Coinciding with the development of neoclassical economics was logical positivism, a philosophy of science that reigned in the 1920s and the 1930s. Its influence on economics, however, was much longer. Essentially, logical positivists argue that scientists develop a deductive structure that leads to empirically testable propositions. This emphasis for methodology is what led to the separation of economics into its positive and normative aspects. College core courses taught in most, and if not all, universities, please, correct me on this, in the USA, are on positive economics. Okay, I've taught them as an adjunct. You mentioned that there's normative economics, but we're not going to talk about normative economics. Let's start drawing the diagrams. Okay. All right. These courses in positive economics came to be known as mainstream economics in the 1960s and the 1970s, which consists of two broad areas: microeconomics and macroeconomics. Okay. A typical graduate program, say PhD graduate program in economics, will consist of several courses on microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics, all mathematically based disciplines. Another term for mainstream economics is orthodox economics. Alternative views of economics are considered heterodox economics. Austrian economics is a heterodox school. Novak's democratic capitalism would be considered a heterodox economics, even though he put the human person back into the discipline. In fact, democratic capitalism would be a further departure from mainstream economics because Novak suggested reinstating a theology, and by extension, metaphysics as a philosophy of science in place of logical positivism. Okay? But what does modern economics, a practical science in the Aristotelian Thomistic sense, have to do with metaphysics, a speculative science? And what does this have to do with the late Michael Novak? In response to the first question, I consult St. Thomas. St. Thomas wrote on the connection between a practical science like economics to metaphysics in his commentary to Boethius's De Trinitate. Okay, he uses medicine as an example since it is a practical science like economics. He indicates, we call that part theoretical, which teaches the principles directing man in his practice. Although not immediately. Consequently, if we call some part of a practical science theoretical, we should not on that account place that part under speculative philosophy. So economics will always be a practical science, but the organizing principles come from metaphysics. According to St. Thomas, economics, a practical science, is governed by theoretical principles directing the human person in economic activity. These principles are mediated through the human person, who is the efficient cause in economic activity. In this way, economics and metaphysics are linked through the human person. But this is based on a commentary from a 13th century Catholic theologian. Imagine saying this to a room full of business people. Okay? What relevance is there between medieval philosophy and modern day economics? Okay? Today, a discussion of metaphysics in relation to economics would be regarded, as Dr. Redpath indicated in his first volume of his not-so-elementary Christian Metaphysics, akin to news from the spirit world. According to Novak, thinkers in the 18th and 19th centuries could not agree on the metaphysical underpinnings of democratic capitalism because they were eager to describe the methods of collaboration, which would not entail any metaphysical agreement. At the same time, democratic capitalism was more of a matter of practice than theory. One of the suggested reasons for the financial crisis of 2008 was that our economic models, a method, failed to predict the oncoming disaster. However, citing Maritain, Novak felt that understanding the universal ideas undergirding democratic capitalism was important. Emphasizing the freedom of the human person and faculty psychology requisite for a dynamic democratic capitalism, Novak began to see the connection between economics and metaphysics through the human person. But Novak goes further. Right? In his theology of economics, Novak cites the symbol of the Trinity, okay, as one of the religious doctrines that shows the essential relationship between these three systems of democratic capitalism. Gilson did this previously in his commentary on Pope Leo's encyclical Rerum Novarum, which he says was in harmony with the metaphysical parts to whole framework. Pope Leo did not mention anything about metaphysics in his encyclical, and neither does Novak, in spirit of democratic capitalism. Like Gilson, we see the metaphysical foundations of these three systems of democratic capitalism working as one in Novak's theology of economics. Again, the market economy, a political system respectful of human rights, and a system of institutions based on a moral culture of liberty and justice for all, mediated through a group of human persons coming together to form markets and engage in economic activity. While some may think that democratic capitalism is idealistic, people are in need of hearing about why the human spirit can be creative in addition to being productive. This requires studying the nature of the human person in political economy from the scholastics to Adam Smith and the seminal ideas he inherited from the Spanish doctors of Salamanca, which were ultimately from St. Thomas and Aristotle. Novak is a model for us on how to communicate truths powerfully, yet simply concerning the human person in the economy. Democratic capitalism is a good political and economic framework because it reestablishes the continuity from the scholastics to Adam Smith, reaffirming the Catholic social teaching that the economy exists for the person and the person not for the economy. Okay, I have a 4.5-minute video to show you from Michael Novak. Okay, sure. Yes.
I'm learning about a lot. I'm not an economist, I'm not a political scientist, I'm a theologian and a philosopher. But I do love America, and I did want to understand what's the inner philosophy, what's the inner dynamism of the American system. And you couldn't learn it just from the economists, and you couldn't learn it just from the political scientists. And the humanists seem to spend most of their time doing footnotes on one another, instead of trying to understand the whole. It's very little trying to understand. If a European or an Asian asks me, what is the American idea? What is the Novus Ordo Seclorum, as is written on the seal of the United States, the new order of the ages? Not very many could help. And so I sat down myself to try to work it out in my own terms. A free society such as I love and would like to see grow here too is a creative, dynamic economy, liberating the poor from poverty. My own family among them came here very, very poor 100 years ago. And a republic which protects human rights and the rule of law and allows for the sovereignty of the citizens who, as it were, hire and fire their elected leaders. Since you really have leaders to move forward. We call that democracy now, but the old idea for it, I think a better idea for it is a republic. And third, powerful set of institutions teaching a good character love for the truth and love for honesty and courage and nobility of soul and setting up ideals for our young so that they become disciplined adults who love their own liberty and are willing to take the responsibilities necessary to be sure that they don't shove all the burdens off to the state. That's the road to tyranny. It's when free citizens decide to do things for themselves and have a capacity to organize to get things done that you generate free societies. Tocqueville said the first principle of democracy, the first law of democracy, is the principle of association, the ability to join together to get things done. I think that's quite true. I think those ideas are still quite germane and are being cited. People are using the term democratic capitalism everywhere. I was not the first, but practically the first to make it popular. And if I had a nickel, if I even had a penny for every time the word is used now, I wouldn't have to worry about my retirement. I think the concept has great utility and helps to shed light in several different directions. I learned to put more emphasis on creativity. At the heart of the capitalist system is not a free market. There have been free markets in history, but not much dynamism. And it's the patented copyright law, the sense that the greatest wealth is not land, which it was for almost all of history, but the greatest wealth is in ideas. It's caput, the old head in Latin, caput, that's where the wealth comes from. And the release of that every human being born is a carrier of capital. And that this capital is of more value than land, more value than machinery, more value than money. I think that's an extraordinarily powerful idea. Not every baby born doesn't consume more, eat more than he or she will create. They're capable of creating a lot more than they're going to consume. That's the secret to progress. So I've learned to think deeper about each one of these elements and see where I was going here and where I was going there. I see more and more people picking up the idea and applying it. So I feel blessed that the book has certain merit.
All right. You have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for taking us back to Malcolm.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I always thought Morgan was the primary influence on Melvin. He hadn't grown as a teacher, as a seminarian. And he wrote glowingly about Novak's insight. I don't know, for some reason I always thought he was the primary.
Yeah, but not in economics.
Well,
In fact, Novak talks about being embarrassed to some extent, and not necessarily as a term, about Americans' lack of comprehension of economics.
But when he was really familiar with the he was very impressed by Novak's insight and methodology.
Peter, we have 10 minutes before the next session begins. So we're taking a break.
But a lot of you wrote this. Later on, you wrote this paper on economics.
No, I know.
Before the next session, we have a lot of time.
Okay.
People can go out and get coffee.
Sure.
You want to do it now, you can do it now.
Yeah, I think maybe now Martin, we can do it.
Okay, why don't we break, get some